And get started here. Hi, my name is Brian West. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and I have the privilege of introducing the eSports for the Win panel. So just starting with introductions, on the left here we've got Steve Aronset, co-CEO of Team Liquid, Craig Levine, CEO of ESL America, Andrew Paradise, CEO and founder of Skills, Waylon Rizal, Director of Esports at Riot Games. And this panel will be moderated by David Beck, who is the co-founder of Brave Media Ventures. So this panel will run for 45 minutes, and we'll wrap up with 15 minutes of Q&A. If you decide that you do want to submit a question, we're asking that you do that through Twitter. The easiest way to do that would be to submit it through the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference app, and we have a hashtag eSports drop down there. If you choose to send it through Twitter directly, we do ask that you use two hashtags, the first being SSAC16, and the second being hashtag eSports. And we will be asking the questions that have the top likes or the top retweets. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
All right, thank you. Thank you also for joining us at the coveted 5 p.m. on a Friday time slot. But honestly, I couldn't have been more thrilled when I got the invite to moderate this panel, not only as a Sloan alum 10 years ago who saw the first conference actually start, now to see it today, nearly 4,000 people strong is really amazing and testament to the team that's been putting this together and also the interest in this space. And what better way to kind of come back into this with a topic like esports, which from what I hear hasn't been a topic here for several years. And yet you probably couldn't pick up the trades today and not see something about esports. So we're really excited to have this discussion with you. There's a lot of confusion about what is esports and people trying to wrap their heads around it. And I don't think it's that complicated in some sense of what at the core you're doing. But with that in mind, what is the business of esports? Is something we do want to dissect, and we've got a very diverse group of people here who play in different areas of the esports ecosystem. So we thought by asking each of them to sort of introduce themselves, the company that they work for, and ultimately, what's that company's role in esports? So to at least we start with some common understanding of who the players are, how they make money, and then I think we'll get into some more interesting discussion.
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you for moderating the panel. Hey guys, my name is Waylon Rizal. I'm the Director of Esports at Riot Games. And so Riot Games is the developer and publisher of League of Legends, which is a PC game, 5v5, that's played around the world. And my team, the esports team there, is tasked with taking that game and turning it into a sport. So we operate 13 pro leagues around the world, North America, Europe, China, Korea, et cetera. And we also put on the broadcast, we host the events, and essentially we create the sporting ecosystem in which these teams and competitors play.
Hi, I'm Andrew Paradise. I'm the CEO and founder of Skills. The best way to describe what Skills is infrastructure for esports. So we build a product called a tournament management system, and then a viewing technology on top of that to create spectatorship. So if you think about kind of any game that's transcended from being played in the backyard to maybe the NFL, in order to enable that pinnacle of play, you need a common rule set, tournament structure, and then the capability to have fans gather around and spectate. I think that's really the difference between competitive gameplay and sports. And so Skills is a business that enables now 1,600 game development studios to release esports infrastructure inside of their games. We're the multiplayer function of those games.
Craig Levine, work at ESL. We're the world's largest independent esports company, meaning we're not a game publisher ourselves. We work with a wide variety of different titles, different genres, different platforms, hosting competitions, everything from an amateur level all the way up to the professional level, sort of filling up stadiums and putting on broadcasts.
Steve Aronset, former pro player, now co-CEO of Team Liquid. We're one of the largest esports teams in the Western world. We have about 60 players. We have 10 teams. We do about 5 million viewable hours on streaming platforms. and we just cultivate esports talent. We grab kids that are 17, 18 to 22 years old, we put them in a facility, we train them to compete at the highest level.
So one addition to that question is, ultimately, where's the money come from? So we're talking about a business, and an ecosystem won't grow unless there's money. So could you talk, any one of you, any order, just talk a little bit about where's the money come from? Who's essentially buying the services? What's the exchange that's taking place?
Yeah, for us as really an esports league, we see our revenue actually break down pretty similarly to traditional sports leagues. You've got ticketing, you've got merchandising, you've got sponsorship, you've got advertising, and you've got media rights. I think the big difference that we have to traditional sports leagues that we're already seeing a shift from is right now the pillar called 30% of sports league revenue that's coming from broadcast rights. For us, is coming from game publishers. So there's obviously a marketing value that's part of sort of exposure to such a wide audience. And as just the media landscape's changing, we're seeing now more and more that transitions start to happen. So it's sort of what you'd expect. Again, for us, it's publishers, it's sponsorships, it's advertising are probably our big three, and then some of the more B2C elements kind of within there.
On the team side, it's very similar. We do sponsorships, makes up a majority of our revenue. Sponsorships in terms of like patches on jerseys that you might see, but we also do custom activations for clients on the digital side. So we'll create documentaries, commercials, we'll publish those on YouTube channels or on Twitch VODs. We'll push content through social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So that's sponsorship, and then we also do merchandising and media rights. And also the revenue that we receive from the leagues that we participate in. So the 49ers plays in the NFL. They get a check for the amount of advertising revenue that's generated on the league level. It's very similar for us. However, it's much more complicated because we have 10 teams that play different types of games. Each game has different leagues that they participate in. So if you can imagine the different types of leagues and all the revenue that flows to the teams.
Just real quick, as everyone's head's probably starting to spin a little bit, esports is a really broad name. It's sort of like sports. If you think within esports, there's different game titles that sort of represent traditional sports. So, right, you've got your NFL, you've got your NBA, NHL, and MLB, each different sports. And esports, you have your League of Legends and your Counter-Strikes and your Call of Duties. Each of them is sort of a unique community within it. So Steve talks about different players in different games. It's really almost an individualized community.
We kind of see the esports ecosystem as having 5 different types of businesses. So you have your publishers like a Riot Games. You have teams participating like Liquid. Your infrastructure plays of various natures like both of our businesses. And then you start to look at broadcasting. So there are a growing number of broadcasting plays like Twitch or the new investment from ESPN. And then finally, you have your derivatives businesses. So those would be companies like, I don't know if people are familiar with Unicorn or the Daily Fantasy Sports segment around esports, but you have kind of these 5 different types of businesses taking advantage of the growth of esports. Within the infrastructure segment, a business like ours generates revenue in a very similar way as to yours. We charge roughly 30% of the revenue captured by the game publishers that use our software in exchange for providing the infrastructure as a service. So it's a software as a service infrastructure company.
And as the sports league ourselves for League of Legends, you have many of the traditional revenue opportunities that Craig and Steve already covered, but I also think for esports, it's quite interesting that it is a digital product, it's a digital sport, and it's consumed over the top. It's not consumed on linear channels yet. I think there's going to be some folks dabbling in there, but I think that we haven't necessarily seen the way that esports, or an esports league will be able to monetize, because I think that going forward, as you create these interactive experiences that people participate in, I think just like they're coming from a gaming environment where they're used to microtransactions and sort of buying up for premium experiences, I think that there'll be opportunities for us to sort of pave a future that traditional sports hasn't yet sort of tapped into. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, I mean, one note, I'm not sure how many of you were in the panel earlier today about entrepreneurs, or the new entrepreneurs in sports. and many of the panelists kind of said we are self-proclaimed OWGs, old white guys, and a lot of what they talked about was sort of the structure of the industry having been so much the same for decades. This is the exact opposite. This is an ecosystem where the value chain isn't. I mean, it's defined in that there are 5 general areas, but where the money flows, where it's going, who has the levers to pull, is not fully defined yet at this point.
And Waylon left off one of the most interesting revenue channels for esports now. I was hoping he was going to touch it, was digital goods. That's where the game publishers are sort of making most of their money as they embark into esports and invest into it, and basically being able to monetize either their existing user base by increased engagement or retention, or actually launch sort of digital esports products. So just like you'd buy a team shirt, team merchandise, and wear it out around school, there's merchandise available within the game that allows you to customize with a Liquid jersey or Liquid patch or items like that are then monetized. And I think a lot of new research has come out recently, billion-dollar industry. I think a big piece of that is going to kind of remain sort of within that digital goods space.
I think one of the big reasons we haven't yet explored this is because our main focus has been on growth. I mean, this is an industry, at least in the West, that is just a few years old in terms of starting up a sports league and having it being played regularly. Our North American sports league, the LCS, is only 3.5 years old. And the focus hasn't been on monetization because it's about creating these really authentic experiences that our communities can latch onto, and that's how we've seen such explosive growth on the viewership side, is that we haven't worried about monetization yet. We've been really treating this as a startup and really investing in it and doubling down on the experience and worrying about monetization later, because I think we'll be able to get creative just like Craig said.
So, going back to, I think we've laid a foundation for the ecosystem where some of the money is being made, but the original point was, why haven't we been talking about esports, at this conference for the past 3 years? And I think this year it's come back because there has been this inflection point, and the press obviously loves to gravitate to certain stories, and this is one that has this sort of gut reaction for people that don't understand esports. They're saying, wait, how many millions of people are actually doing this? But, those of you who have been in this business over the past 3 years or so, I mean, what's changed? What's changed that's led to this watershed moment, this everybody waking up and saying, we need to be paying attention, whether it's ESPN and Turner Sports or whether it's, the major CPG companies. What's changed in your respective area of the business that you think has led to this inflection point?
I think we've only had the elements necessary to create life in the petri dish, so to speak, in esports in North America for a few years. If you look at South Korea, the esports community has existed for a lot longer. And so when you think about a couple of things in the last 10 years in North America, one is widespread computers in households. So in 2000, you have 51% of households with a computer. In 2013, you have 3 computers in every household. You look at broadband, another critical component to creating esports. Broadband, again, in 2000, almost non-existent. It was about 45% of households had a dial-up modem, if anything. And then today, the average household has 30 megabit. And then, of course, on the mobile side, where Skills sits, LTE is now providing 10 to 20 megabit connections pretty pervasively throughout North America. And I think without those kind of precursor technologies, it's not really possible to create esports.
And those technologies really disrupted a lot of media, sort of the democratization of content. 15 years ago, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Twitch didn't exist. So sort of with the advent of the race to zero, cloud computing, all these more macro technology factors, there became this democratization of content, right? We didn't need a deal on ESPN or Fox or whatever it was to get our content onto it. We could sort of self-publish it. And to Waylon's point earlier, it's sort of something that just resonated very well with this audience. And obviously there's cultural and generational things that are changing, more macro again. But really sort of those pieces together, I think sort of built this perfect storm as a platform for sort of this new culture to really kind of bubble up from the underground and get everyone's attention.
I think it's just taken 2 or 3 years for people to catch on. I think it's so foreign to a lot of traditional sports fans that they're just like, what? When we talk to Staples Center, trying to secure it for our 2013 World Final there, they were like, so wait, so you're telling me that are people going to the stadium, they're going to play video games? Like, no. People are going to go to the stadium to watch other people play video games. It's pretty mind-blowing when you've never played a game in your life. And a lot of people who are controlling the mainstream media, they've never played a game in their life. And I think that this thing's been around. And, the LCS has operated with millions of people watching for 3 years, and it's just taken a lot of time for a lot of us on stage to educate, and whether it's Steve working with sponsors or us talking to potential sponsors or other people who are in the media that are interested, it's just taken time for the sports industry, which is not the fastest moving industry in the world, no offense guys, to catch on to something that's like quite niche and quite foreign.
It's amazing you were doing that in 2013. The 2012 stat I saw was 1.3 billion hours of esports watched, or competitive gameplay, and it's grown 20% a year since 2012. And so we're at almost double the number of hours watched. You're in the 2 billions of hours, and yet it's almost unheard of, this whole esports thing. It's been a lot of education.
I think the convergence of technology, the reduction in bandwidth costs was kind of coupled with, I think, Riot Games pioneering a game that was easy to watch and kind of easy to understand and became a spectator sport. The psychological characteristics of a spectator sport, if you watch an esports event and you look to your left or your right, you're going to see somebody that has adrenaline, that's passionate, that's screaming about the game, all the same kind of characteristics that you would get sitting on the couch watching the Super Bowl. And that really is what defines esports for video games. It's the same kind of psychological concept that makes this work, that you can actually watch a game and enjoy it without actually having to play the game every day. And so once that community had been created by all the developers, one with Riot Games and others with Valve and Blizzard, and then you had bandwidth costs dropping, and you put the production value associated with other professional sports, shoutcasters and announcers and post-game shows and analyst desks, and it all kind of felt very real, then you had something that was a real sport that you could monetize, and that's where most of the revenue comes from.
And also, 3 or 4 years ago, the fact that now esports was going to traditional sports stadiums and selling out, I think that actually was just a very emotional turning point for the industry where, it's one thing to say, 40 million people tuned in online, you kind of lose it in the numbers, but when you see just the visuals and, of what these events are and the passion and the fans, I think that's what started to get a lot of the mainstream media's attention and say, wait a minute, something's going on here.
So, now that you have this momentum, you're in the limelight, right? This is this kind of, in some cases, I don't want to put pressure in the sense of it's the make or break moment, but in many cases for a lot of these companies that are going to start to get additional funding, whether that's coming out of sponsors that are putting money and experimenting, or it's actual VC funding, there's still a lot of things that need to kind of come together to grow and to maintain this growth rate. It's not just, oh great, if we build it, people will watch. That's not necessarily how the entire ecosystem matures. What are some of the things you think the industry as a whole, whether it's in your respective area or not, need to focus on to make sure that this doesn't get screwed up in some sense, right? That you kind of keep it going, and whether that's kind of, more, the formation of more formality around leagues and teams. What is it that you think needs to happen to see this growth continue?
I mean, I think at least I'm going to speak for League of Legends because I don't have a great insight into the other sports. But for us, we already have the established sports league. It's on a regular cadence, and people can tune in. So we sort of have the foundation down, and that's what we've really been focusing on building for the past few years. I think the big thing that we can do to help the industry move forward is continued education and ensuring that people who do want to get involved do so in a way that's authentic and resonates well, and it, doesn't leave them with a bad taste in their mouth. So, for example, we've partnered very selectively to ensure that no one comes in and feels burned, because that's happened in the past, and that sort of reflects poorly upon the entire industry. We partnered with Coca-Cola a few years ago. They said, "Hey, we want to get involved, and here are 10 ideas for how they want to get involved." And to their credit, they knew that they didn't they knew what they didn't know.
Yeah.
And so we worked with them instead of, slapping their logo everywhere to essentially partner with them to create the equivalents of our D League or our sort of AAA baseball. And the reception was incredible. And the fans viewed that as Coca-Cola's coming in to help us build the sport that we love. And the brand affinity that it generated was incredible. So, what we can do is ensure that, the people who want to invest and want to get involved, work with us to do so in a good way.
I think two of the most critical steps that'll need to happen over the next couple of years is sort of the formality between players and teams and publishers and leagues and all these different stakeholders in the industry. Other sports, have been around in some cases for 100 years trying to figure this out, and they're still having lockouts every 4 or 6 years. So trying to sort of get that model right and figure out what that right step is, I think is going to be critical over the next couple of months or years. And then also, just your point is there's so much interest in this space and there's all this different investment. I think it's important that not only do people who invest have a good experience, but probably more importantly, I think esports is sort of this foundation, again, very community-driven, doesn't succumb to the pressures to what other people kind of need it to be. So retaining that authenticity and that independence and the culture that's been here and just kind of continuing a little bit with the organic growth and, putting the rocket boosters on in just a few smart places, I think is going to be really important to be disciplined in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think on the team side, we're focused on unlocking additional revenue that is generated from advertisers and marketing C-level executives at blue chip organizations. And in order to do that, there needs to be additional education in the space about how to buy digital formatted activations. So for example, we may have one of our players streaming on Twitch TV, which is a popular streaming platform. The player's at home, they turn their computer on, there's 50,000 concurrent people, everybody at the same time, watching this guy's computer screen, and he just tabs out and he goes to Nissan.com to go buy a car, and then all of a sudden Nissan.com crashes, right? So that's incredibly valuable, but how do you purchase that? What's the rate card associated with that? Right now, it's tough to buy these kinds of digital activations. There's too much history in buying click ads and traditional advertising and pre-roll. So as marketers and agencies kind of figure our space out, that's going to unlock a lot of additional revenue that can be generated to the teams.
Yeah, I think that's an important point because sports is a premium product, right? And it's traditionally received, the valuation of a premium product, but, online advertising is sort of viewed as this really cheap way that you can buy a massive amount of sort of okay engagement. When you see something that is like essentially a sport in all the essence around engagement and passion and interaction, how do we sort of bridge that gap between people seeing us as a sport that just happens to be digital instead of a digital product that may or may not be a sport?
To jump back to the question about what's missing and what has to happen over the next couple of years, we think a lot about the pyramid that makes up professional play in offline sports. So if you think about a game like football that started in the 1860s, it took almost 10 years before the rules were written down, and actually almost 50 years until the NFL was first formed. If you look at the NBA and basketball, about 50 years again, and we're kind of hitting that 50-year mark in video gaming right now. First video game machines were sold in 1972 with Pong. You're starting to have this multiple generations of human beings all interested in playing these games competitively, and yet right now esports is still just kind of the 1% of players. It's the very top players participating. We're really excited about the 99% and what that can mean for the industry. And one of the ways you can think about this is the ratio in traditional sports of players to viewers is 1 player for every 3 or every 4 viewers. In esports right now, the ratio is 1 to about every 50 viewers. 50 to 52 is what I've seen. And so you see this huge opportunity to get more players involved in every level of play. One company I'm thinking about when I'm talking about this is a startup out of California called Super League Gaming. I don't know if people are familiar with it, but they're remarkable in that they're working on building out, I would call it the Little League of eSports. So it's a after-school program where kids can go and play in competitive Minecraft tournaments. And actually, they're repurposing movie theaters around the California geography for organizing this league. I think it's 8 weeks long, and they had so much success with their first couple of seasons that they're now going to a much more regular cadence.
Just the point about authenticity, I mean, when I first started learning about esports, and it kind of struck me as, let me make sure I understand what you mean by authenticity. And I do remember hearing, someone essentially explain how, a lot of the purse, some of the winnings for these tournaments, there was the opportunity for fans to start actually contributing to that and to see, wait, not only am I watching this, but I'm actually contributing to the to the prize. It was kind of one of those moments too, where this is a fan community that's wants to see their favorite players win, and obviously nobody is contributing, to someone winning the Super Bowl and all the riches that you have as being part of that. So what else can you kind of describe in terms and help the audience understand the authenticity aspect of esports? Because it is something that I think people kind of who try and wrap their arms around to understand.
I think authenticity in esports, I mean, we're a millennial audience, predominantly male, like 95% on the spectator side, fan side. And that audience can kind of just, marketing just has this like aroma. They can just sniff it out and just say, okay, this is just crap. I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to watch it. And it takes kind of experience within the space to know the jargon that's being used so that you stay authentic. There's a bunch of terms that if I were to go through them, you guys would be like, what the heck is that? That makes no sense to me. Well, that's what is esports. That's the authentic side of esports. And that's why a lot of the marketing that's been used predominantly to date, it just doesn't smell right. And people can tell. And that's what's different about our space.
Yeah, go for it.
It's really hard to define. I mean, it's just, you just know when it is and you know when it's not. Just like any other sort of cultural movement, I mean, it's like Omaha in football, right? If you don't play football, you're going, what the heck's he screaming? You just know it. And it's being a part of that generation and being a part of that audience. And I think the millennial generation, more than any others, right, it's wants a sense of ownership and contribution to causes that they believe in. So things like crowdfunding and Kickstarter and all these different things is changing the way just people care about things. It's no one way to define it, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's, a good way to think about it is, I think there was a game a couple weeks ago where Stephen Curry made the half-point shot, right? And it was at the last couple seconds to win the game. And it was kind of this amazing shot of the year. Similar things happen in esports. Like one of our players, Phoenix, his name's Phoenix, and he did this quadra kill on Azir, and it was like the play heard around the world, right? Like within a minute, there was probably 2 million views aggregated on YouTube and people going crazy. And so when people say, Shurima, which is like a game sound that's made by this character, people know exactly that's the shot heard around the world. So it's just knowing stuff like that.
It's like also on the presentation side, when we were like spinning up our broadcast, we were thinking to ourselves like, who's going to be like the voice? Who can be the voice for League of Legends esports? We're like, we're big sports fans. So we're like, do we call up ESPN? Can we get Chris Berman? Can we get Chris Berman on the phone? But then we realized that like they're not going to speak the insider terminology. They're not going to understand the memes and all the sort of intricate facets of the game. And so we ended up having to have this careful blend of taking people from the inside, the ex-professional players, the game designers themselves, who had the traits of being, great broadcasters, and then bringing in sort of craft experts to sort of merge those two together and essentially create like the perfect League of Legends shoutcaster from the inside. And that's why, as we continue to evolve, it's so hard, I think, for people to understand that getting in and being authentic, it's really challenging and it takes time. And we still don't get it right all the time, but it's really being a part of the community and understanding what makes them tick.
So I love that you brought up ESPN. Let's talk for a moment about what some of the kind of traditional television, broadcast cable networks are doing, which is getting into this space, which whether it's Turner E-League, the idea of broadcasting gameplay or integrating, you'll have your stream on Twitch, but you'll also have a broadcast element. What excites you about this, perhaps, or what kind of are you a bit fearful of? Just in understanding that, as you kind of said, someone needs to place a bet, someone needs to be the pioneer in trying to make this work, but you've obviously caught the attention of major media companies. So what do you make of these recent moves? And you're only being streamed now and recorded, so this will never...
I'll jump in. I think one of the challenges, this is the infrastructure guy in the panel, one of the challenges with traditional broadcast media getting into esports broadcasting is I think one of the most compelling features on Twitch is the chat room and being able to dialogue with the broadcaster about the content as it's happening. It's much more like interactive television than it is a one-way media experience. And at least from my viewpoint, it's unclear to me how you can replicate that same sort of feel of engaging with a broadcaster. And that is a lot of the content right now on Twitch and on YouTube.
Yeah, I think as we look at these broadcasters and different partners and media companies, looking to understand these sports, in some case get involved, we're excited. For us, one of our goals, and we think there's a huge opportunity, there's 100 million people that come to Twitch. How do we expand our reach and relevance beyond that hardcore gamer who someone might tangentially be interested? So we think that places like linear TV probably have short, I think the whole life cycle of it's probably a little bit coming, towards the tail end of its life in general, but we think, for example, maybe it's more player stories or documentary or 24/7, your Hard Knocks. How do you do something that expands the ecosystem of content for these fans rather than trying to take live competition, which has lived on Twitch and developed a culture around that and just live digitally? So we think these different platforms can broaden the base of fans. We did some tests this past weekend for our big championship in Poland, and we, for the first time, went sort of a semi-exclusive strategy. Before that, we'd only been on Twitch, and we saw the number of unique viewers just spike as we experimented with different platforms. So I think there's a lot of content opportunities. It's still very early. These players are just becoming stars now, but there's so much interest from a fan base. So we think all these different media platforms are a great way to kind of tell those stories and engage people differently.
I think to that point, I think, the question of television versus sort of digital over the top, it depends on the market, right? In some cases, where you don't have as, easy access to, sort of your computer at home and streaming technology is not as prevalent, I think, going to television makes a lot of sense because you are reaching someone who you couldn't normally reach. I think in places like North America, however, or in places like Europe, where, these fans are already on digital, I think it's not going to do much to actually grow the sport necessarily, but I think it does get me excited because it adds a layer of legitimacy that, when you think of this as a business and you think of this as an industry, I think that is actually quite important. And the challenge, however, is are these companies coming in, I hate to sound like a broken record, in a way that's authentic and will tell the story of esports in a way that sort of like does it justice. And if the current core group of gamers and fans see that, will it be a turnoff for them to see their story told in a way that might be too dumbed down? So it's going to be a really delicate road to walk. I mean, certain companies are doing a pretty good job. I mean, giving credit to Yahoo, ESPN for starting digital coverage and bringing in people from the community that the core gamers already know, and so you have that blended with journalists who can maybe level up the craft a bit, and so I think that could be a pretty compelling thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that with the addition of TV, you may have advertisers get a little more comfortable, but also expand the pool of dollars, or I'd say the number of things that you can invest in. You can invest in the broadcast. You can invest in programming around the broadcast. You've got a number of opportunities for those dollars to be placed. But again, if it's not authentic, that could be a tough experience. Let me switch gears for a second. I've been looking at some of the questions that have been coming in, and we're going to do more of those later. But this is an analytics conference, and would love to just get your take on analytics in supporting and driving the business today. Sort of where do things stand, and where do you see analytics playing a role in the future?
I think on the team side, so our core competency as a team owner is to produce the highest performing athletes so that they can put on the best show at these tournaments, right? And a piece of that is to optimize the technology that we're using to train our athletes. They play computer games, so it's they're doing scrimmages against other teams. So we've partnered with a group that does a lot of work for analytics with NBA teams, and we're figuring out how do we take scrim data, upload it, meta tag the data, and keyword search so that we can go to specific instances within the game, review that information with our coaches and our assistant coaches and with the players, because just like regular sports, our guys are, they've got PT in the morning, they do film review, VOD review, scrimmages, they do their own personal practice, they have a regimented schedule for all of that. So during that film time, we need to be able to use technology to make it easier for them to find the mistakes in their play. We need to be able to analyze their communication and find out what is being said, what's not being said, the amount of communication, making it more precise, more militaristic in a lot of ways, especially in team games. So technology and analytics plays a really important component within the player optimization. And it's something that we are heavily invested in trying to figure out and pioneer.
For us, analytics is, and data in general is almost, it's about a third of our team between data science and then marketing analytics. And the different functions break down around, at least in data science, around player matching, player rating, and fairness in general. I think one of the critical components when you think about esports or just any sport is how are you going to create fairness? Because without enforcing fairness, I think a lot about that example of the woman who jumped on the subway in the middle of the New York Marathon a few years ago and finished in the top 100. And she actually she was awarded a prize and a medal, and this kind of went on for almost a week, I think, before they figured it out. And so fairness in esports is such an important part of the promise and building trust, whether people are competing at home or in person. We were actually all chatting a little bit about these questions before, and I think one comment was made about the early esports in North America, where I think you were saying you're actually being touched by the players while you're playing. Yeah, exactly. And you can imagine how that could result in a lack of fairness between the two teams competing. So at least at Skills, we're very focused around those core areas for data science, and then of course you start to think a lot about all of the layers of analytics on top of the play. Unlike traditional sports, every action's already captured digitally, and so you can think a lot about the types of technologies that are being built for the NFL as already being possible in the digital world. They just don't exist yet. So there's so much opportunity to build out the tooling that would enable even greater competitive gameplay.
Yeah. Our ability to understand the fan, understand what winning looks like, we are really limited only by our imaginations, our ability to code. In our case, we're limited by the size of the data science team, which we're looking to double down on. And I think the cool thing is that being a digital sport, we should be leaders. Like we shouldn't be necessarily looking to follow here, because we don't need to worry about capturing the speed of a basketball player as he's running down the court. We know it. We can just code it. I think that this is a realm that esports is still in its infancy in many cases, and you're going to see some pretty interesting revolutions. Whether like a team figures out how to fundamentally assess the value of a player because we don't know that yet. Or, as a sports league or broadcaster, we can better understand why people watch, how they watch, their habits, and then because it's a digital experience, we can customize it very well and easily for each of them. And I think that I hope it'll be a much different discussion on the analytics side 2 or 3 years from now.
Interesting. Just kind of riffing off a question that actually just came in about teams and individual players around the idea that as betting, right, as fantasy becomes a bigger and bigger piece, and as Biggie always said, more money, more problems, as money floods into this market, prize pools start to blow up, and team loyalty and player loyalty come more into question, potentially. I mean, this could be a scenario. What do you guys see in terms of what needs to be done around, match fixing is really ultimately the question they're asking. It's sort of, do you think this is a real fear? I mean, at the end of the day, there's people that fix matches, since the beginning of time, but is that something that you guys are genuinely concerned about, given a lot of the money that's starting to come in?
Yeah, I mean, with increasing stakes, there's just, to your point, more problems. For us, we have a partnership with Sportradar. They analyze all of the betting odds that are going out, could kind of identify trends. They suspend things on suspicious activity. So I think like most traditional sports leagues, I think being a little bit more open-minded towards the idea that this is happening with or without us, and sort of embracing it in a partnership form and using data to kind of identify those potentially fraudulent trends before they become sort of actionable instances is important. There's been instances of this in South Korea and StarCraft 2 recently. It's taken down sports like cycling and even tennis most recently, had some scandals. So it's a very real consideration, I think.
I think we have a moral obligation to, remember, this is a young sport with a young audience, and we have to stay super vigilant when it comes to ensuring that, betting and gambling doesn't become a problem. Right. One way is through partnering and ensuring that, if it's going to happen, it happens in as controlled manner as possible, limiting the amount that you can bet and trying to ensure that it's not something that is encouraged. So, from our perspective, we really do try to avoid it because it's not something we want to encourage. Even if it is happening, we try to minimize it.
I think sports and sports betting in various formats has existed kind of for all time. There's this interesting relationship between sports betting and sports where the person betting has greater engagement and retention in watching a given sport. It's something that's not often talked about by people on the sports side. Having said that, when you look at the current daily fantasy market, for example, eSports is already the 7th largest sport in daily fantasy. And certainly that drives engagement back to the core eSports that are being played. When you think about match fixing, tennis recently had a big scandal. You have the same kinds of dynamics in eSports that are, and I think the difference is, at least from our perspective, a lot of the analytics that we can create on top of all of the data coming in from the gameplay can allow us to automatically flag suspicious behavior at a level where a player not playing at their peak performance, or one of the stats in the esports industry is actions per minute. There are data anomalies that allow you to very quickly flag unusual behavior at any second of a game. And I think that's a lot more challenging in offline sports, where all that data isn't being captured and analyzed.
So what's, again, fascinating, right, is the things that take place in traditional sports happening here, even performance-enhancing drugs, as being something that would not necessarily be top of mind, but is actually something that maybe, again, grabbing onto a couple key stories, but legitimate concern?
Yeah, we had an incident about 8 months ago where, and it's sort of one of our competitors in an offhanded interview said, "Oh yeah, the whole team was on Adderall." It was like a YouTube video. Huge news story. So we actually partnered with the World Anti-Doping Association, and we drug test at our events now. We're proud or relieved to say that every test has been kind of clean since, and that's not for every individual game that we do that for. But it is a real issue, and we think that the competitive integrity is sort of the fabric of any league, and being proactive in the approach is something that we feel sort of a stewardship towards.
It's interesting, though, because I don't think we know what performance enhancing looks like. I think that's something that while I think we should be vigilant, and I think the sort of the spirit of maintaining competitive integrity is of utmost importance. It's still really early, and we don't know, does Adderall help? I don't know. And we don't know if there are other drugs out there that we're not testing for that might help. So I think that this is something that, at least our approach so far within League has been working really closely with team owners and trying to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And this is thankfully a very small, really tight-knit community where hopefully we'll be able to nip it in the bud. But staying vigilant, I think, and staying open to what might be performance enhancing is sort of our approach.
I think you have the same onus in esports that you do in offline sports, which is there are going to be scandals. There will be people taking drugs or doing other things to make matches unfair, and it's up to kind of all of us involved in the ecosystem to try and police that. And it's really about, are we doing a good job of trying to stop that kind of behavior to ensure fairness across the different esports that are developing?
I think, most of you, or not most, some of you may be thinking performance-enhancing drugs, esports, or playing video games. Like, what could you actually take that might help? I think the question is more pro players. What is the difference between a pro player and an average Joe, right? And from the work that we've done in partnership with the Mayo Clinic, we've done the psychological and also the physiological characteristics of top-performing esports athletes. And how do they go about this game, and why are they so good at it? If you watch a pro player play, why is there APM like Mozart playing the piano, right? And we've come to the conclusion that some of it has to do with visual screening and being able to look at, let's say, like a chessboard and visualize a number of steps in advance and pattern recognition. So you see a certain aspect in the game, you see it for 1 second, you could close your eyes, and you could say this is what's about to happen and get in advance of your opponent. So it's visual screening, it's eye tracking. When your eye scans the monitor, is it fixated in one point? How long is it fixated for? Does it jump around? Is it collecting data? How much data collection points per second? So I guess the question is yes, there is definitely things that cater to pro player versus average Joe, and it has a lot to do with the physiological characteristics of being able to play this game at the highest level. I think that the number of people that just play League of Legends is, 70 million?
Yeah, back we announced it a few years ago, yeah.
Yeah, so a few years ago it was published 70 million. How many of those 70 million players play at the highest level? Maybe 100. So you're talking about, and the players on our teams, they're prodigies. They type 250 words per minute. They have perfect SAT scores. They're geniuses. Like that, they're those kinds of people. So how do you optimize their performance against somebody else that they're going into this kind of intellectual sparring match with? And that's what's fascinating about it.
So, and we haven't really talked about, again, the global nature of the sport and the fact that in countries like South Korea, where it's, there's not as much of a disparity between traditional sports and esports. How far away are we here? And it's a bit of a loaded question, but, what do you think it's going to take? Because if someone came into this conference right now and, hadn't known this was esports and we were talking about these exact topics, it's exactly what happens in traditional sports. So, what do you think the gap is today? How long will it be before that shrink in mindset?
Well, it depends on the market, but for here, I think it's, this is one of the most competitive sports markets out there. It depends how you measure it, but if it's by viewership and by engagement, we're kind of already there. Maybe not NFL levels, but, this is something that is, that the number of concurrent people that are watching this thing, the number of people who actively tune in time in and time again, the length that they watch, this is something that there's a generation of sports fans growing up where this is their sport. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves over time as that cohort ages ages up and has children, and sort of like the next generation coming up playing Minecraft, you know, I think they will naturally look to esports as being a thing. So I think we're either already there or we're really close.
I think the only thing we need, to Waylon's point, is time. Right, I grew up going to Shea Stadium with my dad and, you know, eating ice cream out of a little Mets hat. You know, he never played video games. When we look out at sort of people attending our events now, the competitions, it's, you know, parents with young children. So there's going to be generations of young children that are brought up as Team Liquid fans in the same way that they were brought up as Patriots fans. And I know that sounds it's odd for most people to understand, but it's a real passion point, and as that becomes a connection between generations, that's just gonna keep cascading. And in some ways, there's no way to really accelerate all of those elements, but to Waylon's point, like, in a lot of ways, we're already there and tracking well.
Last year, we had more people watch the top esports competitions than the NBA championship. And we certainly are a company that's out there saying that next year the top competition may actually surpass the Super Bowl. Certainly the number of fans for esports looks to equalize with football next year, which 2017, it's here right now, and it's happening. You know, I just can't get over the stat of when we started in this business that, you know, just in 2012, 1.3 billion hours of viewership. I mean, it's unbelievable. In terms of the stats. And so I do think we're there already.
So with as much momentum as we have today, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, from the venture capital, the investment side of the house, there's a lot of people peering in. And on one hand, you know, if you look at what the VR is going through right now, where there is a lot of money flowing, a ton of money being deployed, esports, you're seeing a ton of interest, but people are still a little gun shy about that. And can you explain, why do you think there's that challenge right now, you know, for people to place real bets, particularly from a VC side?
I think the esports industry is, there's a lot of moving parts to our space. If you think about it, it starts at the top with gaming in general, PC, mobile, everything on web like Facebook games. And then within gaming, there's just a subset of esports, which watching competitive events, watching other people play professionally. And then within that, there are content that's being created by the developer, tournaments run by ESL, and then there are teams that are building these players up that are performing in these tournaments. And that's happening across multiple games. So as you can imagine, it's just a very complex industry. So for VCs or investment that's interested in getting into the space, there's just a very large piece of education that needs to take place before they're ready to just spend in whatever area that they feel is best, because it is complicated to figure out and get your arms around.
And there are not many places to really invest. If you're looking at sort of the traditional sports scene, and you have like the leagues and the publishers, and in many cases you can't invest there. And I think what's been cool is that, or what's been really cool to see is that, you know, the value of the team, which is I think a place where a lot of these VCs are investing, has risen dramatically over the past 3 years. I think, you know, someone bought one of our LCS teams for, I think, something like $25,000 3 or 4 years ago, and now you see, you know, multi-million-dollar valuations for these franchises. I think it's a little bit easier for, you know, sponsors. It's still challenging for them to understand exactly how to get in, but then at that point you can begin working with leagues or with teams or with individual pros. But yeah, I think to Steve's point, it's an educational process that we're trying to sort of help a lot of these guys along and understand, like, where can they best, not just where can they invest, but like how, and how can they do so in a way that speaks to the gamer so that their brand is received positively.
Yeah, I think it's fragmented. It's confusing. There's, you know, lots of big stakeholders like the publishers that ultimately own the IP, and that adds complexity to it. And, you know, beyond all that, it's a young group of entrepreneurs that have sort of helped build this space up to this point. And you know, for some people that could be either intimidating or scary. But, you know, to Waylon's point, those that do it right, you know, there's I don't know what those answers are. I'd be doing more of it myself, but there is opportunity out there. It's just so young.
When we went out for our first round of financing, the VCs had never heard of the word esports, and they're pretty confused by what that term meant. And I spent most of the meeting explaining that viewership and that you have all of the characteristics of offline sports existing in this online world. That conversation is very different today. But to give you an idea, back in 2012 when we started, the market forecast by 2020 was 300 million, whereas today the market forecast is 4 billion by 2018. So the forecast, I feel like it goes up every 6 months now in terms of how big this market is and the various ways to take advantage of it. But to jump back to that earlier point about the different kinds of businesses that are being created, they are the same kinds of businesses that powered offline sports in terms of how to take advantage of esports and how to invest in it. Maybe the one difference that we hit on is unique digital goods that are being sold by the publishers, which is a new thing that doesn't exist in football or other places. The equipment manufacturing, I guess, is not part of the NFL's revenue stream necessarily in football. So there is a lot of opportunity, and there are a number of businesses being created to take advantage of that opportunity. Who the winners will be, I think, in many of the segments is yet to be determined. I'm not sure if everyone followed the announcement from both Activision and EA about launching multi-billion-dollar initiatives in esports. I think they have a lot of ground to cover to making that a reality. And of course, so do many other businesses that like to get into the space.
So we have 2 minutes left, and you guys have been incredibly helpful in laying a vision of where this industry, this ecosystem is going. You only have a certain number of hours to spend every day against your own business. If you had one additional hour, where would you spend your time? What would you be thinking about? What would you be focusing on to win?
For me, I think it'd be sort of probably 30 minutes figuring out how to structure sort of everything. Again, just a lot of stakeholders that I mentioned earlier. And second piece is education. The more people like us are out there and we have the opportunity like this to kind of talk about what we do, hopefully the faster that process goes.
Growing globally. I think that one of the easiest things for us to do is to naturally fall back into things that we're comfortable with, focusing on North America because our company is based in LA, but understanding that esports is something unlike many sports actually, whether it's League of Legends or other games. League of Legends in particular has it's this global phenomenon, and we have to make sure that we don't underserve the aspiring pro scene in Vietnam or in Chile or any other country, because this is something that I think could sort of reach across boundaries from a cultural perspective or a national perspective and approach something like soccer, which has been, I think, to this point, sort of like on its own island. And I think that that's something that really excites me, and I wish I had more time in my day to really focus on how do we present the sport differently at a local level, or how do we hire up local teams to really deliver that experience that each sort of region deserves.
On the Team Liquid side, I would say there's a difference between other professional sports that are based on geography. So that's where your fan base is. In aggregate, we have over 6.2 million followers on social, but they're not all in one city. They're worldwide. And so we have to figure out how to create more meaningful, deeper relationships with our fan base that's outside of geo. And you do that from a digital perspective. So there's a lot of creativity in how that's executed on a sports team level.
I think for us, as an infrastructure player, the 1 extra hour would go into getting greater involvement from the existing tech platforms. So seeing greater investment into the development of esports from your top tech companies would be time well spent. They, I think, have a lot of interest in the future of interactive television, and interactive sports is or esports is a big part of that future. So if we could get more investment and more cycles, and I think that is ramping up. For example, Facebook has a pretty big esports initiative now that they kicked off last year. So it's, 2016 has just a very exciting level of interest in esports. So it'll be great to see what this looks like as it goes more and more mainstream.
Great. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. And I want to thank you all. It was incredibly, incredibly informative and hopefully provide everyone with a real good perspective on it.